I remember when we were having that conversation, I told you, like, I feel like we're both just standing at the precipice of something amazing. And I don't know what it is, but I can feel the power of it. All right, welcome back to Mystic Mythos, a collection of stories. And today I have Jen Holland from Strong and Sultry and Drip Practice with us. And we are going to hear her story. So Jen and I crossed paths when we were working together. It was kind of divine timing, I think, because I was at a place in my life where I was ready to start making some changes, and Jen just happened to come along and was exactly the person that I needed in that moment. So here's Jen. So when would you say that your metamorphosis, so to speak, started?
Well, answer that question first after saying that I agree about our divine timing. And I've loved being a part of your journey. And thanks for being a part of mine. So I usually start my story at my first divorce, which also kind of just culminates a lot of big life changes. Was leaving the religion of my upbringing, Latter-day Saint Mormon religion, and at the same time kind of being introduced to like the concept of emotional abuse, and not even like having that on my radar and trying to figure out what was not working well with my relationship, leaving and navigate a religion that I had, that gave me a lot of structure my whole life and comfort, and just facing a lot of just like existential questions about what do I believe and why am I in this relationship that is making me feel like garbage. And luckily at that point, this was about 8 or 9 years ago at this point. So my background is in fitness, exercise science, and I always knew I wanted to teach yoga. At this point, I'd been teaching for 10 years other group fitness formats, and I stumbled into like the yoga that resonated with my soul. And my 10 weeks of my teacher training, I literally just jumped into to becoming a teacher. I wasn't like a practitioner of yoga before I even jumped into my teacher training. And I always tell people it was like 10 years of therapy in 10 weeks of yoga teacher training, and just bawled my eyes out almost every weekend on my mat. And just for the first time, I think actually allowed myself to feel a breadth of emotion. And that's like a huge fork in the road for me, is when I found yoga. I don't really know how I would have come out of like the other side of all these other huge life changes that were all happening kind of simultaneously without this groundedness that my yoga practice woke in me, and the importance of creating safe space and ritual and all of that. So fast forward, and I know we're going to get deeper into it, but that's kind of where it started. And since then, I've had a myriad of wild life experiences, another marriage, another divorce, which also was littered with a lot of abuse. And that's about when you and I met. And and you have an intimate view on what was going on there. And so yet again, making hard decisions, coming out of it on the other side, even stronger, even more sure of my ability to love myself, and with more of a passion to teach other people just the skills basically to open ourselves up to source and universe and love and abundance, and allowing ourselves to live. Because I just think this current day society, as humans, we're just going through the motions, and we're meant for so much more. We're meant to experience so much more, and to have more joy and love and laughter and peace. And I think peace is very much underrated on the scale of things to seek. And as I settle more into my peace body, I just realize how important it is to support people on that journey to wake up and understand that we do have control of our lives and our realities. And if you want to make changes, you can. So
yeah, for sure. Well, and I think it was really interesting, the timing of when we crossed paths. So for you, like, you were kind of coming to a point that you were deciding how best to love yourself through your second marriage, and trying to navigate like how to go about the completion of what that situation was to you. And like, you were learning how to give yourself grace. And I have to say that, like, for myself, like, watching you navigate that definitely showed me how to do that. And I had never done that before. Like, I was really impatient with myself. I've always been like, go, go, go all the time, like constantly distracting myself so I don't have to feel my feelings. For sure. And then, to see you like in those situations, I remember a lot of conversations between us that I was like, I hope that when I go through hard things, like I can be as gracious with myself as I saw in your example during that time, because there was so many things that were going on in your life and you were trying to navigate so much. And I was like, man, like you were such a good example. Let me just flatter the crap out of you, like seriously.
I was like, you're gonna make me cry, like
Oh,
10 minutes of this podcast. But thank you. One of the one of the biggest things I always tell people is what's beautiful about the people in our lives that we look up to and that we admire is that they reflect something within us, but then we reflect usually something back to them as well. And, like I'm just here doing my best. And I've always said, our example is the best way to teach people. Just do what you say you're going to do and allow people to watch that. And look, and we just had this conversation looking back on about 2 years ago. I'm so fucking proud of the way that I showed up for myself. I didn't have the tools before then to have so much grace, and where I'm sitting now, I see how everything in my life has taught me this specific skill set so that I could be gracious in that scenario and teach other people hopefully how to traverse hard shit with grace as well. And I remember distinctly kind of feeling at a loss with my second marriage and being like, okay, I don't know what to do. And I know I can't make anyone change. Right. So I went back to work on myself and I was just like, well, the only thing I can change is me. And that's when I ran into You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. And I think that's when I started my gratitude practice, which I haven't let up. And that really started changing everything, honestly, like just a lens of gratitude and a lens of more compassion and doing like a kindness and compassion mantras. And that just really kicked me off into like a whole nother level of my self-work and self-love for sure.
Yeah, I think that was about the time that you moved out to California. And that was the last time that I saw you in person. It was like 2 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Which is so wild to think about, but also like it was so like on the outside of it, and to have been a witness to this transformation that you were going through, like to just observe what you were doing, I was like, something's happening. Like I could see that you were this ball of goo, like ready to change into something new. And it was so amazing to see that happening like before my eyes. And then to also be able to say like, dude, if you can do it, like I can definitely do that. That was like a recurring theme, I think. Cause when we first met was like 4 years ago. Right. It's almost 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And when we first met, I was like, there's something about you, and it was great. And like, I remember talking to the director over our department, and he said, I knew you guys would work well together. And I was like, that's kind of cool, that he was able to see that. And like, thank God he did, because I definitely needed you in my life at that point. I was navigating some really tough things. And so I think I actually met you right around the same time that I started my year of Yes. And I was like eyeball deep in all these opportunities and crazy things that were going on, and like wanting to say yes, but also unpacking all this, I don't know what you would call it, like programming, I guess, by like my upbringing and society and the experiences that I had been through. And so like unpacking those things, and then to have you come in that moment was, like I said before, it's divine timing. Like it has to be, because you were everything that I needed, like for that support at that time. And I remember the most like profound conversation was that first day that we went in and you were doing yoga with me and we had the weights in there and I said something and you were like, why? And I had never had somebody ask me that question before. Like, okay, but why do you feel that way? And I was like, well, shit, I don't know. It was so big, like, that you were just like, okay, well, why? Because that's dumb, basically. I just needed that friend, I guess, that was like calls me out of my shit.
That's something on this journey that I've realized is a piece of this, remembering your wholeness and remembering and like stepping in your magic is understanding that like you're not everyone's cup of tea. And the more you stand in your power and in your truth, it just clarifies the people that are your cup of tea. And I've realized as a coach and a mentor that as much as I deeply am like gooey, ooey, lovey in my feels, I've always said if I had to choose a Harry Potter character that like personifies me, it'd be Professor McGonagall, because she's such a hard nose and she's like, she is sticks to the rules and she's kind of fierce and scary. Like she's a little bit like, oh God. But when she chooses to like bend the rules for you, it's when it fucking matters.
Yeah.
And she loves fiercely, and she does and she does it through this like structure of keeping people safe, through the way that she does it. And I love that. I have a little bit of a sharpness to me in the way that I just want to be direct and I want to be truthful. And that's not everyone's like delivery method that works for them, but for the people that it does, which obviously I'm a similar human, it's that slap in the face sometimes that you need. So I'm grateful that this is why we're talking, right? Like the way I speak, the way I am, the way that we are, it resonates with each other. And then we're able to be mirrors and hold space for one another and work through these things in such a non-judgmental way to just be like, yo, we're all just pinging around in life. Like we don't really know what the fuck's going on, but I'm here for you and I see you and I understand you and you're funny as hell. So like, let's go, So, I remember you telling me that you probably were like, I can't do that or something. And I was like, well, why?
Yeah, it was. Cause I was like, that was when I told you that I wanted to compete in Highland games. And I was like, I don't think I could ever do it. And you were like, why?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I don't know.
You're like, all I have is a bunch of excuses for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Like it was just a bunch of excuses. And I was like, I've never had anybody say that before. And so I was like, well, I don't know. Like I've never really looked at that. And my background a little bit is just that all of the times that I've ever stood up for myself in my life, I've always been shut back down. Or, like the women in my life were not really strong women.
Mm-hmm.
Having grown up like in the culture that I did, a lot of times like women were meek. And I am just not a meek individual. Like everything that I do is loud and proud. And like now that I have discovered this part of myself, right? But up until then, like I had spent so much time, like I was medicated for 12 years. I had been, to therapy. I had been through a ton of stuff. And I'll cover that in another episode. But having gone through like all of those things and then like come to this point where somebody's finally like, okay, but why? And I'm like, I guess I don't have an answer for that. Like it was like the loving push that I needed, and then we started like you helped me put together that program, and like a year later is when I competed at that strongman event, and that was the scariest shit I've ever done in my life, but it was the most amazing thing as well.
I'm so happy that I was able to be there to like watch you do it too, like
Yeah,
to watch that whole thing come full circle was incredible.
it was so cool to be able to have that support because I was really scared.
Mm-hmm.
Like going into it. And I remember getting there and seeing the people I was competing against. And I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I am nothing like these people. And making that judgment. And I was like, now to look back on that, I'm like, how sad that I was going to make that judgment. And I almost backed out. Like, I literally was like right there on the edge where I was like, yeah, I can't do this. But then I remembered that question, why? And that was like my 20 seconds of courage. I was like, no, I'm signing up for this and I'm doing it. And I did it. And it was, I knew I was going to take dead last. And I knew I wasn't going to win like anything crazy, but it was transformative for me to have stepped into that power that one time, and it changed my life.
Yeah, that's what all it takes is that one time. And that's what's crazy, right? Is so many times we get to the point where you were at and then we back away.
Yeah.
Because we're afraid of these things in the future that we have no clue if that's going to actually happen. Like we're literally projecting these like programmed fears into our future, and then it's keeping us from living what we actually want to do, right? Because we're just like suspended in this fear, and in that moment that feels so scary, when you just choose to say yes instead, like that is when transformation happens. I think transformation happens in like the most uncomfortable thing. And I know you looking back on it, like you said, it's sad because you met so many people there who were, they're incredible. Like all the
Yeah.
women that were competing, they didn't bat one eye at you or be like, why are you here? Like you are the one that
No.
was by far the most critical of yourself. That's what I've learned in my own journey and now coaching, like hundreds, I might even say at this point I've coached and taught thousands of women. We are by far beating ourselves up and creating literally nonsense in our heads, because if you ask anyone in a room with you what they think about you, it's going to be like almost the opposite.
Yeah.
Like they're
Yeah, it's
stoked that
true.
you're there and stoked, like people who are experts or athletes, like they're psyched when people begin their journey, because we all know we start somewhere. Like, and that's
Yeah.
totally why I was able to be like, well, why can't you do these games? Because I had just stepped into like my weightlifting power, like,
Mhm.
and that transformed my, like, that shattered my own glass ceiling when I started
Yeah.
doing things with my physical body that I, for my entire life, was like, your little tiny bird arms can't do that, Jen. Like, you're never going to be able to do a pull up, and you're never going to be able to lift heavy weight. Like, you're just a tiny, skinny, meek little woman. And then I broke all of those things. I shattered that. And then I started asking, not what can't I do, but like, well, what can I do? And it was like a
Yeah.
huge switch that I feel like you had in that moment. I was like, okay, well, why? And you were like, oh, well, that is the question, isn't it now? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like I guess I should be asking why, not why not, right?
For sure. Well, I mean, and one of my favorite quotes, and I probably have said this to you before, is in the show Schitt's Creek, where Dan Levy's character David Rose is sitting in the car with his sister Alexis, and they're driving to the DMV to get his driver's license, and he's rattling on and going off about all these little details, which is totally me. That I'm like lost in the weeds 90% of the time with all the details and not paying attention to the big picture. But he's doing this, and Alexis stops the car and looks at him and she goes, David, nobody is thinking about you the way that you're thinking about you. And like, how fucking true is that? Every time.
Every single goddamn time, every time.
Nobody is thinking about you the way you are. And in that moment, like being there at that competition, like not one of those ladies was looking at me and like, what the hell is she doing here? But in my own head, that's the narrative that I'm telling myself. So to be able to like change that, it really blows the doors off of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool to have witnessed that kind of thing. And so that's kind of like around the time that you moved out to California, I remember we had a conversation that you were like, I need to do some healing. And I was so sad because you were leaving. And I was like, part of me wants to be selfish and like tell you not to go and on all these things. But also, like, I remember when we were having that conversation, I told you, like, I feel like we're both just standing at the precipice of something amazing. And I don't know what it is, but I can feel the power of it. And then you go out to California, and then boom, like a couple months later, you're like, I'm going to do this thing, which then led into being the drip practice.
Oh my God. I think about, and it's crazy that I was only in LA for like 4 months. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna back up and tell a little bit about this story,
Yes.
like leading me up to there, just so everyone listening kind of understands the background. So I've talked a little bit about these marriages. So the second marriage had children involved, little girls that I acquired when they were quite young, 18 months and 5. And when I left, they were like 5 and 10, 11. And thought, this man was the love of my life, my ride or die. We were going to have a family. We were going to all these things. And just the wounding, the deep wounding that he had from his childhood just was a poison in his system that as much as I tried to support and help and love, just he couldn't seem to really care enough, or I don't even know if it's care, but like just go there. I don't know if you could face those fears. And I this is where my compassion for every human being sits, because you don't know what someone's been through. And I mean, I knew what he'd been through to some degree: sexual, physical, mental, and emotional abuse as a small boy, slapped across the face of the dinner table for having feelings and expressing them, just like really terrible, awful things that no human being deserves to experience. And what I'm so vocal about is separating mental illness We'll talk about mental illness and trauma. And at this point, I truly do believe most mental illness stems from trauma, which is just a giant stress response to the system.
Mm-hmm.
But at what point does mental illness, when, like, separating the person from the mental illness, separating the person from the abuse is really difficult when they're abusing you.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was the most confusing fucking shit I've ever been in. I was being gaslit. I was being verbally abused. And then I turn around and he was falling on the spectrum of being borderline personality disorder, which makes a lot of sense with how I felt really ungrounded and unsafe all the time, because I just didn't know who I was married to, essentially. It just kept changing.
Yeah.
And so it was honestly just, whew, thinking back on it, I'm so proud of all the healing, because I couldn't speak about this shit even a year ago. It still just broke my heart to even vocalize. Like, it was just too raw. It was just scary, and I was heartbroken, and no one had answers. And that's the thing, is nobody has the answers. Like, your therapist doesn't have the answers, and they can give you the tools and they can empower you, but it's all about you figuring out the answer for you. And I just had to keep listening and had to keep loving myself. And that's when I chose to leave. And then I knew I needed to heal. And it was awful. I just remember being in LA when I finally was there. I quit my job where I met Sheena. This is like October of 2019, right?
Yep. Right before COVID.
Yep. So I quit my job to go work for a startup that was located in New York. I wasn't moving to New York, but I was moving to LA because we were in the kind of like the cannabis sector, and I wanted to be in a state that was fully like legally with cannabis, just to have an easier time with that. And she fired me literally like 2 weeks. I was already like moving to LA. So I was like, so suddenly I found myself jobless and like homeless, because I had moved out of, I guess I was on my way en route to California. And I was just like, okay, cool, universe. Like, I don't know what this is all about, but whatever. We're just going to go to LA. And like, I didn't know what else to do. I just leaned in, and I thank God. My brother and his husband live in a beautiful home in LA with a backyard. And I just like laid out in a thong in the sunshine for like weeks and just like journaled and cried and just like let the California sun just like basically heal me. And in that process was reading the 4 Agreements and like all these other books. And I'm insatiably positive, and I don't let myself sit around very long, because I know that's when I start being a self-saboteur. So not long after being there for a couple of weeks, I was like, all right, I got to like look for work. I got to figure out what I'm doing here, and started, looking for work. And I always rely back on fitness. So my degree is in exercise science. I've been in the fitness industry for 18 going on 19 years at this point. And when I don't know what else to do, I fall back on that, because I'm the most expert in that field and I can usually get jobs, and I love it. It's also one of my passions. So started getting jobs, really slaying it. I got this really dope yoga teaching gig that totally boosted my confidence in just my ability to even say I'm an expert in my field. Like, I don't know why I needed to be told by this like shishi yoga studio in LA that like I'm the shit, but like, I don't know, I did. And she interrupted my audition and was just like, you're a rock star. I want like you to start immediately, and you're going to take over all these classes. And I was like, yeah, I'm the shit. And then COVID hit and all fitness centers closed down, and I was left jobless again. And at this point, Queen, I'm like, I was already very much stepping in to, like, you were seeing it from afar, right? Like this, it's like I had to break my life apart to get out of it. And in the process kind of shattered my own heart, and then like was putting back together the pieces, and was just this really gooey ball of whatever. And I was just like metamorphosing, and all these things I think were like building my chrysalis without me really like knowing, And when the pandemic hit, though, what's really interesting is I felt like I was like ready for it. Like, because I had been through this really intense, traumatic like end to my relationship, and had just been healing. And so when it happened, I was just like, bring it on. And I felt very much like it was my role during, especially the beginning of the pandemic, to be like a ray of light and to keep people happy and motivated. And so I just started teaching online classes and just trying to be what I could be, because I just threw my hands up at my brother and was just like, I'm really trying here, but like, I can't pay rent. Like, I don't have any money, and I think this is like the last piece of me really, I mean, well, let's be honest, this is a lifelong journey, right? This like uncovering our power. But one of the big things for me was this like quote financial rock bottom that I hit.
Yeah.
Where I literally put the last like $1,000 I possessed into like growing, at the time was Yogalesque. It's now Drip. and was just put in my faith to that, was buying some equipment so I could start recording things, and drained my bank accounts, and then lost all my work and just had to ask for help. I really realized how much I didn't value just me. And it uncovered this layer of the love the definition of love that I was given was so riddled in my ability to achieve, in my ability to perform, in my ability to be big and bright and bubbly. And no one really ever taught me, and that's what I was regurgitating in these marriages that were very abusive, was I was finding people who loved me because I was doing something for them. I wasn't falling in love because of my being. And I had to this shit's gonna make me cry, so get ready, everybody. In the best way, in the most happy tear way. I just started to ask for help, and as I did that, it was like I was forced to receive love there was no expectations on the other end of it. And both my brother and his husband, and then when I felt very called to come back to Utah, my friends Katie and Zach, who I asked, basically, I was like, I have no money, but I want to move back to Utah. Can I live with you? And they were just like, absolutely. This is what's crazy. Everyone was like, Jen, your presence alone is we can't even put a price on it. You being in our home has made us better, and we know it'll make our children better. And I just was sitting here in awe, why it's so hard to hear you're a magnificent human being, and to
yes,
that is whew. But I kind of had no choice. I was I have to accept help. And I guess I just wasn't realizing that on the other end of that was this beautiful lesson of people being not only do we want to help you, but we want to help you with we don't expect anything in return. Because what you're giving us and your essence and your love and the way you choose to be in the world is worth so much. And we see that, and we love you, and we want to support you. And it's wild to think that that's where I was. I literally moved back. It was end of April, beginning of May. So barely a year at this point for me moving back to Utah. And now I'm teaching my own, I have my own business. I've made more money month after month, my business is continually increasing. I'm my own boss. I took all these chances with literally nothing. Not literally $0. I had a lot of wealth with love and support and people. Where I'm at now, in 1 year, I'm astonished when I look back on it, and I'm just holy shit. And again, it makes me mostly excited, not only for my future, but honestly for everybody else's. Cause you said, if I can do it, so can everybody else. I really don't think there's anything special about me outside of the fact that I'm a good person. Maybe we should start with that, I'm a good friend, and I'm a good listener, and a lot of people love me. I think maybe that's kind of required, but I literally think you can have nothing, no resources, and get whatever you dream of if you are creative and are willing to ask for help and support from the people in your life and source universe.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think that you have to be willing to accept that message that you are enough. As you exist, whoever you are in that moment, you're enough just by existing. You don't have to contribute or owe anybody anything or bring something to the table. Your existence is validation.
I feel that's what this episode should be called. You are enough.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that I talk about when it comes to unleashing your magic with manifesting your reality and getting the things that you desire is the constant nourishing of your self-love and of your remembrance of your wholeness. And a big part of that is shadow work, right? Which I know you're dipping your toes into. And I honestly I'm kind of new to it as well. But God, once you kind of grasp that concept, and I'm sure a lot of people, quote Carl Jung and don't really understand it because it's kind of one of those weird existential, as within, so without, as above, so below. You're okay, dippy, woo, woo, wee. But then when you really understand what shadow work is, you're oh, damn. But I get it now.
Oh, he's right. Yeah.
And it's funny to watch this reflected in my coaching clients because they'll always say something about let's just say an example, oh, about my spouse. And my answer always to them is well, I think you need to go within first. And they're is that seriously your answer for everything? And I'm just
yep,
pretty much because it should, this is the thing, and should, and I don't like to use that word. I think when we're in should land, it's lots of external expectations and
Yeah.
uh,
A lot of pressure.
stories that someone else told us we need to do these things in
Mhm.
order to be lovable, successful, whatever. So I don't try. I try not to be in should land. I try to be in I want this land. Very
Mhm.
those are a little bit more internally locus of control rather than external locus of control. So what a beautiful world it would be if we because I'm on this like kick too about just compassion and approaching every human being we approach with curiosity because we don't know their story, we don't know their history, and we're in this day and age of culture of like cancel culture and just like, if you believe this one
Mhm.
thing, then you're in this camp and I don't like you. And it's just so divisive. And I'm like, God, can you imagine a world where we all just like took a pause and in any conversation that you had, if you have like emotions rising up or you have you're repulsed by something or like it's what's the magnet term of when you're like repelled when you're repelled from something,
Mhm.
instead of like immediately judging the person who's like quote making you feel that way, in this work you realize that you're the one that's control all the time of
Mhm.
what's going on. And so then it is an act of, okay, let me check this with myself first. Is this
Right.
something that is bringing up maybe a shadow that I'm not looking at, or a past belief system that isn't serving me anymore? Let me like check myself first. Let me take a couple breaths and then let me respond in a way not in my reaction space, but in my like, I thought about this, I'm going to breathe about it, and then we can move on. And can you just imagine like, and that all does start with us because we're constantly having conversations in our own minds. So if we're being mean to ourselves, if we're being reactionary and non-compassionate with ourselves, of course we're going to turn around and do all those same behaviors to people outside of ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So which is why I'm always like, as within so without, as above so below. Like if you're not doing, like the work, like you can't expect anyone in your life in any dynamic to suddenly just like change. Like
Yeah.
it's that's silly. Like it's like what they say about, insanity is someone trying to like change what they're doing by doing the exact same shit. Like that's
Mhm.
insane. And, a big part of that is this like looking at the polarity of life and not judging it and softening to the fact that these weird, shadowy, fucked up parts of ourselves we actually kind of like, which is why a lot of times we regurgitate these like weird behaviors that don't serve us because there actually is something deep in there that like we kind of love. We love the attention. We love the familiarity of the discomfort. We love, I don't know, like that's your journey to go on to ask about. But it's just such a beautiful, it's all just a reflection of one another. And so this all started with you saying, a big part of like consciousness and awakening and healing is that the ground level of accessing the truth that you're enough and that you're
Mhm.
worthy, and that practice of compassion, of softening, and then extending that outward to everybody else. And I just think like we would see massive change and transformation if everyone just had the vocabulary to have this lens to view the world through.
Yeah, yeah, and kind of like to equalize some of it because it feels like there are a lot of times where we have these ideas or ideals that are dictated to us, by our society or our upbringing or habits or, wherever all of those things. It's always an external source that brings those to us. But if we're able to like take these things off the pedestal and drop them down, like you said, to ground level, and then maybe all these dark parts that we're constantly like shoving down that
Mm-hmm.
we allow those to come to the surface and everything equalizes to the same level. And then you look at it and you go, okay, this is the full spectrum of who I am as a person. And now that I can see all of these things, now the beauty is that I get to choose, right?
Yep.
So, like in your situation, like when you moved out to LA, you kind of had that moment where you had nothing left financially and you had to accept this gift of love from other people in whatever form it came in. And that allows you in that moment to equalize who you are as a person and pick all these pieces apart. And maybe it did require like really shattering every piece of you to
Mm-hmm.
look at all of this stuff and say, these are the parts I want to keep. And these are the parts I'm going to fix and work on. And these are the things that I no longer feel serve who I am becoming.
Yep. Precisely. I just was getting this visual while you were talking about that. Like, is it Japanese culture, Chinese culture, where
Japanese.
where
Mm-hmm.
when they fix their vases, they fill them with gold, right? So
Yeah.
so that we're not like, it's not a flaw. It's, we realize that sometimes things get broken, and when we choose to fix them, we can honor that. And I just kind of visually saw myself in this spaciousness, probably in a field somewhere, because that's where I always go in my mind space, is like somewhere in nature. But like, here's Jen's everything and shattered into pieces on the ground. And I was the one that basically chose to do that in some ways and shapes, right? Like I was just like, no, I got to get out of this. I knew where I was at wasn't serving me. And I knew I'm so linked to my purpose here on this planet that I was like, being in this relationship is not going to support me to do the things I know I'm here to do. So I got to go. And even though I had to shatter a bunch of things, like I knew it was what I needed. And God, when I was younger, I thought the right decision was always the easy one. God, how that's not true.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times the best decision is the fucking hardest one. So I just had this visualization of me like kind of just like with no agenda and no pressure, like wandering around this field, picking up each part and being like, do I need this? Is there something under it I haven't seen? And tossing some things away. It's like collecting shells. Like you'll pick up one and be like, oh, I don't want that. And you'll toss it to the side. Then you pick up another one. You're like, ooh, I really like this one. I'm going to hold on to it. And it's not like you're like judging them for like, oh, that's ugly or worthless. Like you're just like, oh, I like this and I want to look at it and this is shiny, or, oh, I like this and it's kind of dark and whatever. I'm going to keep all these things and I'm going to let everything else just stay to the side. And another thing that came up to me was, I wonder, you know, because a lot of people create huge, massive change in their life when they hit a quote rock bottom, whether it's an addiction and they almost die, or illness, or they lose somebody, or unfortunately it has to do a lot with death. Like when we have a brush with death or the loss of something or someone, you know, or loss of financials, you know, like then we're looked at it. And I don't know. This is a question I'm going to ask and I don't know the answer to it. You know, do you think as humans we have to hit rock bottom? Or do you think other humans could be ignited by the stories of other people's rock bottoms? Like, I'm just curious as to if that makes sense. You know, like what can we inspire other people to change like before they have to hit rock bottom? Like, is there a way that we can help support people to not go there? Because that'd be dope. I'd like to keep people from like trying to kill themselves from like not going there, and, you know, and like keeping the suffering to a somewhat minimum. I think it's part of this process, but I'm just curious what you think about that.
I think the suffering is necessary to a degree. I think that this has always been my perspective, even from a young age. Like I said, I'll tell my story a little bit more in detail in another episode, but just a little bit of background is that I had a very, very trauma-laden childhood. And it was full of a lot of heartache and rejection and pain. And I think I always felt like there's got to be a way that people don't have to actually experience all of these really hard things. There's got to be a way that you can learn from someone else's experience. And that's kind of what this podcast is all about, is bringing all of these beautiful stories out and saying, like, people have been through some tough shit. And sometimes you can learn something from that. And like, here's the resources that were helpful for these things. And, you know, here's some of the things that maybe sparked some of this journey. And I'll put the show notes up on the website and link any of the books and things that we've talked about in this episode so that people can find those resources. And that's my hope, is that, you know, the people don't have to go through the actual heartache. They can go through a smaller version of that and still have the same amazing, like, awakening experience.
Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the reasons why I am so passionate about reviving sacred sisterhood and connecting women specifically. If you think about it from a tribal sense, right? Because I'm just asked too many. I'm just so damn curious. You know what? I'm trying not to say two anymore. I'm not two anything. You know what? I'm just right. I am everything. And so, you know, in more tribal societies, women were I kind of call us like the secret keepers of humanity. Like we, as mothers, you know, with the anatomical parts to grow another human being. And then let's not underestimate what also comes along mentally and spiritually and emotionally with our bodies being designed to carry and care for life in utero and externally. You know, like as women, we're creatures that are a little more tapped into emotions. We're a little more tapped into the flow of life and to these secrets of love and healing and, you know, emotional, I'm going to call it emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. I think that just kind of happened more in a tribal setting. First of all, through more physicality, which we've just lost a lot of in our current culture. But then I really think that like women told stories to one another matriarchs would, pass on wisdom. I'm sure before you got like quote married off or had sex for the first time, like all of the elders and women were speaking to, you know what I mean? Like I'm sure
Mhm.
this was going on behind the scenes, right? As women and mothers, especially again in a tribal setting where men would be gone, for a long time and they wouldn't be around a
Yeah.
whole lot. Like we were gathered and we did this thing. And part of that is speaking truths. Part of that is having that forum and that space to be like, yo, what's working for you? What's not? And doing kind of that like human epidemiological, like what's working for you, maybe it'll work for me,
Yeah.
before hard science could like prove things, like we had to talk to each other about it. And I think we can't assume that science is going to cover everything, especially with the vast, fastness of the increase of technology and our
Mhm.
social structures changing wildly, in a very small amount of time. I think we are in an era where we're not really admitting how much like just like trauma is happening around us all the time, and we don't have these tools to like be emotionally resilient, which is why we have so much mental illness and anxiety and all of these things. And I feel in my bones that one of the things we've lost that would really help humans learn to love themselves again is to create spaces where we can connect as humans, to especially create spaces where women can connect with one another, and to revive this celebration of the human existence, and allow it to make our lives brighter rather than this like weird chase that we're all doing that makes no sense to me about, more stuff, more whatever,
Mhm.
looking like someone else. Like it's all just so external, and which is really like one of the huge principles of my drip practice, which for everyone that we've been talking about they might want to know what that even means. um,
Yes, talk about it.
so drip stands for daily rapture and inner peace practice. So it has two P's, and the second P stands for practice. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's drip practice. It's
Yeah,
what
I'll
it is.
leave links
Yeah.
in the notes
And
for sure.
you can put my website on there too.
Sure.
And so for those of you that don't know, rapture outside of a religious context, the definition is the pursuit of joy and pleasure, basically.
Mhm.
And I'm really, really big on the daily pursuit of pleasure, but not in a sense of the way that especially American culture looks at pleasure. We immediately, whenever I talk about self pleasure or any kind of pleasure, people immediately are like, are you talking about masturbating and sex? And I'm like, well, I'm not talking about those things, but they're like
But
literally,
not exclusively.
yeah, like it's literally a sliver of what I'm talking about. Like
Yeah.
and this is Ayurveda. I have so many like modalities that I've learned in the last 18 years of my teaching and life experience that now culminated in this practice where I bring in all of, I think, the most potent things that I've learned. And one of them comes from Ayurveda, which is the sister science of yoga. And they talk about delighting all five of your senses on a daily basis
Mhm.
and learning how to like basically enjoy pleasure of your smell sense, of your taste, of your touch, of what you consume with your eyeballs, what you consume with your ears, sounds, podcasts, conversations, media, like art, the people that you surround yourself with. It's not just like, like computer shit. It's like, and art, it's also like, what are the things you're taking in?
Mhm.
And how do you delight all of your senses? And how do we learn how to slow down enough to tap into the fact that our bodies are capable of feeling so much, like so much. And then simultaneously, we also have to heal
Mhm.
because, like what we've been talking about this whole time, so many of us are deeply, deeply in our wounded space where, when we were children, we were literally trying to survive and create
Yeah.
these weird beliefs and these weird behaviors that we've just
Mhm.
been like on autopilot with our whole lives. So it's a combination of this, and drip also. So the last part is inner peace practice, which is where I bring in breath work and movement to help us feel grounded and connected to the moment and to our feeling safe in our bodies, because it's this combination of creating and establishing habits and rituals that make us feel safe, to then unwind the beliefs that aren't serving us in a space where we can. And then simultaneously, we have to build healthier ones, right? Like we have to
Yeah.
replace what's going on, which is kind of like what this practice means to me, and delight, and learning how to delight yourself, and learning how to relax, and learning how to unwind your stress, and learning how to ask for help and create boundaries and open up about your truth and listen to other people's truths. And all of it is this like delicious combination of powerful tools that if you chose to create something like and it doesn't have to look exactly like drip, but it's this principle of, of all those things I just talked about that then are going to help you find peace, heal the things that aren't serving you anymore, and replace them with more beautiful behaviors and habits and thoughts that you would like to start having.
Yeah, I think that that's really the critical part, and maybe that's the resounding message of everything that we've talked about today, is like breaking everything down and removing the parts that maybe were like a learned behavior when you were like 8. As a
Mm-hmm.
little kid, like you have something happen to you and you learn this behavior that feels like safety, right? And then you just keep it your whole life. And then one day you wake up and you're 32 and you're like, why do I keep having this response to this thing? And it's because at 8 years old you had that response and you just carried it with you, but you've never unpacked that and looked at it and said, oh, this is why this happened, and I can see it now, like this served a purpose then, but as an adult your lens on reality is a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And then making sure that you make room by clearing that out and acknowledging it, and maybe, you know, having some gratitude for whatever purpose that served, and then opening up the space so that you can bring in more of, like you were saying, the delight and the really really high quality good shit.
Yeah.
Like all the best things. Like you can't bring those into your life if you have all these things that you've learned throughout a lifetime of, you know, going through pain and trauma, because we all do. If you never look at those things and take them out, you don't have room for all the good things on the other side.
Oh yeah, there's another Carl Jung super famous quote that he talks about, you know, I always mess it up, but essentially he says you're going to keep like regurgitating the same behaviors and calling it fate because you're unwilling to bring those things to the surface. And so we're going to go about life just like, oh, this just keeps happening to me and I'm just going to blame it on everybody else. But in reality, it's your dismissal of the fact that there's even anything there to take a look at that actually keeps you from stepping out of it. I think one thing that I'm feeling called to share is that this process is really fucking hard. I think it's imperative to have tribe that understands what you're going through, that it
For
makes it
sure.
easier. Those of you out there that feel like you're alone on this journey, if you're even beginning it, if your parents don't understand, your family doesn't understand, your friends don't understand, and you feel like suddenly you're alone, just know that you're not alone. And it may take some time, but just keep vibing your vibe, and the people that understand you, see you, and want to celebrate you will arrive, and just keep that faith. And that's been a big part. And I try to remind all of my clients and friends that this isn't easy and you may feel a little bit lonely, but it's worth it. And I promise that people will come when you choose to be your vibrant, authentic, healed self. You will find other people like that, and they will show up for you when you need them, and they will continue to champion you when this is hard. And the other thing I want to talk about is the why. Like, why would you even want to, you know, I think a lot of people are like, okay, so this is really fucking hard. Like, why would I even want to do it? So
Yeah, because when you look at the face of something that's really challenging, like you look at like stone lifting, if you want to look at that and you want to see like somebody, you can see the effort on their faces as they're trying to do this thing. But on the other side of that, you also have the positivity of the accomplishment of doing the thing and all the lessons you learn along the way.
Oh yeah. So we've got that. We've got opening up space, like you pointed out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when we snip these energetic ties to these dark, heavy things, we then suddenly open up so much more spaciousness for the light, beautiful, bright things to come in, and maybe some of the dark things that we like too. It's, you know, I'm not trying to judge, whatever. Not only that, but like the bigger picture of this, what you and I are talking about, is can we just like fucking stop passing on our trauma to other generations? Because
Yes.
that's the biggest thing for me is like we shouldn't be this traumatized. Like now, do I think life is hard? Fucking
Yes.
absolutely. Do I know
Yes.
things in my future are gonna come slap me across the face again? I know that
For
without
sure.
certainty that my life is gonna take ups and downs until I die. However, I now have a tool set, and you've watched me. I like
Mm-hmm.
each time I go through a hard thing, I sharpen my tools even more, and it gets easier, and I have more grace. And what if we just, you know, started out a generation of children that just, I don't know, fucking weren't traumatized, or were raised by a generation of human beings who chose to heal themselves, so
Mm-hmm.
that we could pass on these tools to our children and the future generations, so that they have these tools when they're 8, 9, 10, when things
Yeah.
happen that are really hard. And because honestly, like these child, like really young childhood trauma things, like, I just think they shouldn't be happening to begin with, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm here to help empower human beings to heal so that we can just like reset that. And again, it's not that I'm saying that human suffering is not part of the plan. It is. I think it's
Right.
necessary. It's what we're talking about. Like, there's so much huzzah, hurrah, like accomplishment on the side of doing hard things. So I don't think that's ever going to be wiped out of the human existence. But this whole passing on of trauma and refusing to heal ourselves because it's hard. I'm to this point where I feel a little bit of like Mother Gaia's, when she just burns the Serengeti to like start over again. Like I'm just like, I don't care how
Mhm.
hard it is. It's not okay anymore. Like that
Yeah.
my like devotion to being like, nah, man, like this, how hard this isn't worth thousands of other people
Being
continuing on
hurt.
this cycle of trauma. Like it's just,
Yep.
that's not worth it to me. And so I don't know. I felt very called to just like speak my truth about why should you heal, that it's hard, that it's not easy, that yes, we all need support. And no, I'm not trying to whitewash like the fact that we need to do hard things, but I think the really hard shit and what's making life unbearable to a lot of human beings, how many suffering human beings do you know right now who just
Oh, yeah.
can't get out of their own way, who are letting
Yeah.
the state of the world crush them, because the state of the world is wild right now and kind of
Yeah.
depressing
And heavy.
and so heavy. And so it's just becoming more and more obvious to me that this should be humanity's focus. Like this is
Yeah.
the thing, like that will start to actually fix a lot of the things that I think we all feel are broken and heavy and fucked, essentially.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I think trauma is the pandemic. Like,
Mhm.
that's the real pandemic that we're facing in the world, right? Like, it's not it's not sickness. Sickness happens one way or the other. It's not a lot of these things that we're, getting caught up as a society in focusing on. It's really these underlying things that nobody wants to talk about. That's where the real pandemic lies, is within communities not recognizing the signs when a child has been through trauma and addressing that and saying, no, that's not okay. And also like allowing a victim to be a victim,
Mhm.
because that doesn't happen in
Mhm.
a lot of cases. And that's hard. Like, and being somebody who's gone through trauma, I'm sure like you had your days where you were like, I don't even get to honor, myself for the hard things that I have been through,
Mhm.
especially when you're living, in a situation that is re-stimulating that trauma.
Mhm.
I think you're right. I think it's something that we have to wake up to, this scenario where people are hurting, and maybe instead of saying like you're on this side and I'm on this side and now we're enemies, maybe we look at each other with some grace and we say like, yeah, we're on opposite sides, but this is why I feel this way, and here's my life experience, that has taught me this, and what's yours? And then let's really sit and listen to that, and listen, not just to react.
Mhm. Listen to understand.
Yeah.
Like, why the hell are we listening to judge? That's literally our first priority. Like,
Yes.
and it's funny, I was just looking at my Instagram this morning and I came across that thing that I wrote before. And I was like, if comparison is the thief of joy,
Mhm.
then connection is how we source joy. Like if
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And connection requires patience and actual empathic listening. And listening is also how we communicate, like it's what we also how we respond, and things that I've come across within different therapy modalities. So, like I just see our interpersonal communication skills are garbage. And
Mhm.
everyone just wants it's because we're also addicted, we're all addicted to just being distracted, and like it's really easy to become distracted by judging a bunch of people, but that's just like a waste of time. And instead of again like having these conversations, like prove somebody wrong, like what, because that makes you feel good momentarily that you're right. It's a very like
Yeah.
human ego thing to do. What if we rather connected to understand and to be curious and to approach someone and just be like, huh, that's interesting. We have different belief systems. Tell me how you got there. Why do you feel that way? How can I
Yeah.
support you? And at the end of the day, this could be a whole nother podcast episode, but I'm really over the fact that people think that we have to be friends with literally every single human being that you come across. Like, we are all allowed as human beings. We have the right to our own ethos and our own belief systems, and to like guide our lives by truth. Now, obviously there's like, I think general human principles about like being kind and like, there's like just some things that are not okay that are universal truths, but
Mhm.
we are all allowed to have the things that are important to us. It's just part of the process of picking up the pieces and being like, what serves me and what doesn't. And then we're 100% in our right as humans to go collect the other humans who have similar ethos and belief systems and values. Because if we were back to be in the tribal sense and day, and like you want to create your reality, wouldn't you create your reality with other people who want to create the same reality? And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that your reality is garbage. Like,
It's just different.
it's just different. And we're
Mhm.
allowed to be like, oh, that's cool, you're different. Like, I guarantee you, if you I played this out in college, so I don't know if you even know this about me, but I was an RA at BYU. Like, I was over like a whole floor of freshman women
Mhm.
at BYU, and I connect with people pretty easily. It's one of my superpowers, right? And
Mhm.
also, which I think was born from trauma. So we can also be grateful for our
Right.
trauma for some things.
Yeah.
Definitely made me like kind of a chameleon and able to read people really well. Sad that that was forced upon me, but still grateful for it nonetheless. And I was determined to connect with each woman, like each of these girls that I was kind of in charge of during that year. And most of them was really easy. Like, we connected in the first 20 minutes, first conversation, maybe second, third
Mhm.
conversation. But there was this one girl, and I don't remember her name, but it was months that I was like determined to find like the one thing that we could connect on, and I kept
Mhm.
trying. And every time I walked away, I was just like, God, I just don't, this piece, it's human to me, just is like really hard for me to understand. And
Mhm.
then there was that one day, like something clicked in our conversation, and it was like, I don't even know. It was like we liked the same cookie. Like, it literally was like something that was like so like whatever. I don't even remember what it was, but I like found that thing, and suddenly we had common ground. And after that, our relationship was so much easier. And so I think there's a lot of things that pool into this, like, why are we here, and how
Mhm.
can we start reversing and sharing the love of this? And I think a lot of it is slowing down and listening to other people and prioritizing connection and curiosity more than this like weird judgmental, like, I'm just going to prove you wrong to make me feel better about myself thing.
Mhm.
And being okay with walking away from someone and being like, okay, they're not going to be like my closest friend ever. I'm not going to call them when there's an emergency, but like I could grab coffee with them. They're another human, and
Yeah.
human to human, we all feel the same. We all bleed the same blood. We all, and yes, we all are born in different circumstances, but when you really strip all of that away and we can sit in a space of love and compassion and acceptance, we can be like, cool, well, I see you and I see why you have that opinion, and like, namaste, like, you don't even have to touch
Mhm.
that person ever again if you don't want to, but like, why we're just like re-traumatizing one another. Well, and that's part of it, is that we're unhealed. And when we're
Yeah.
unhealed, we just continue to like operate out of these kind of toxic, abusive, really, like
Mhm.
codependent things. And then we just like project all of that onto everybody we come across. So like I said,
Yeah.
maybe we could have a whole podcast episode about that one, but I just wanted to like shoot that out there because that's bubbling up in me in this moment.
Yeah, no, like, I definitely would have you on again. I love talking to you.
I know, me
We've
too.
always had this gift of being able to just roll for I mean, last time we talked, it was like 3 hours, so
I know. I know.
I have the gift of gab. That's why I'm doing this podcast, because 'cause I'm like, "I have this gift, I might as well be using it." Like, I have something to offer. I'm good at collecting people's stories. That's been who I've been my whole life. People just are comfortable with me, which I'm so grateful for, but I think too, it comes from a place of trauma. Like,
Mhm.
I was the same way. I had to be a chameleon because if I didn't behave the way that was expected of me, it was more trauma.
Mhm.
So you learn very quickly to adapt and to become who you need to be in the situation to stay safe. And I've acknowledged that through a lot of therapy and definitely come to a point that I'm like, no, like that's cool. And it was helpful. And I'm grateful for that tool and being able to find a way to relate to people. But I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
I threw that one to the wayside, processed it, moved on. And now I'm like, no, like I know who I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm confident in who I am now. So I'm just gonna roll with who she is and hug little 9, 10-year-old me and say thank you, for
Yep.
teaching me these lessons. But this is no longer needed.
Yeah, and to validate that little girl and be like,
Mhm.
you know, when it comes to inner child work, I often guide people to like take your present self or maybe your future goddess self, whatever like helps you visualize this best, and to visit
Mm-hmm.
your little you self in that moment of trauma and show up for them in the way that you wish someone actually had in a healthy way, and to
Mm-hmm.
scoop that little girl up and to kiss her on the forehead and just tell her everything's going to be okay, and that the way that she feels is so valid and that
Mm-hmm.
she never deserved to be treated this way, right? And
Yeah.
to see her for who she is and then be like, okay, and from this moment we gained X, Y, and Z belief systems. What's serving us, what's not. And like you said, let's leave behind the things that don't serve us and hold on to the
Mm-hmm.
things that do. And something that you just said triggered this memory in me. And this was also another big shift in LA is I was reading the Four Agreements. And there was something, I don't even remember what part of the book, but I felt like this like universal slap across the face in the most like
Mm-hmm.
loving way, where I realized that my fear of being my authentic self and not stepping into my gifts, which if this is one of your gifts, right? Like you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
collecting people's stories. I suddenly realized that when I'm a coward, like when I'm being a coward to not step into my gifts because I'm afraid of what other people are going to think of me,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm basically like turning my back on the universe and like slapping the universe in the face. And
Mm-hmm.
I like got overcome with this like shame, but like the kind of shame that is healthy, where I was like, who am I to deny
Your
these
gifts.
gifts that the universe has
Mm-hmm.
blessed me with that make me unique and make me powerful? And I'm over here like worried about what Jane next door fucking thinks. Like,
Yeah.
how sad. Like, you know, like, and I don't know, there was something about that moment where I was just like, I'm done. Like, I'm done being afraid of these things that make me powerful and that make other people uncomfortable. Like, and that's, I
Yeah.
really started coming into knowing that the way people treat me is 100% a reflection of their own self, which is why people who are loving and kind and beautiful guarantee they're loving and kind and beautiful to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the people that aren't are going to be the ones that judge you and pick you apart and yell at you. And luckily I'm in this space where I can just look that in the face and be like, that's all you, baby. Like that has nothing to do with
Uh-huh.
me. And I'm just going to keep living, because guess what? When I just live my life and do the things that are in alignment with me, my life is amazing. I could care less what people think about what I'm going up to, because now I have this beautiful life filled with beautiful things and opportunities. And if I cared what people thought about me or whatever, you know, in a bad way or a judgmental way, I would
Mm-hmm.
never be able to do half of what I'm able to do.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I want to come back to that, what you just said about going with your current self or your higher self and going back to a moment. We haven't talked since this happened. So I've been doing EMDR for about the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And really, really digging in and reprocessing some stuff, like some of the most traumatic things that have happened in my life. And with that comes, I guess, like the brain processes these traumas and these things that are harmful to us. And then it moves it from a place of trauma where we're reliving this story that doesn't have a beginning, middle, or end. And then suddenly you process it and it's gone. Like it's not gone, but like it's not traumatic anymore. It kind of moves it from that category within the brain to a different category where you can sleep easy. You can, you know, have the same triggers come up later and it's not triggering anymore. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so in that I had one thing that was really great that happened was I had these really beautiful memories of my mother that came back to me
Mm-hmm.
from when I was quite young. And you know me, like I've had a very complicated relationship with my mom for a lot of years, and to have those come in has really changed the way that our relationship works, which is wonderful. But I also had an experience that came through that was traumatic and I had no memory of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was from when I was about 5. It was before I had even started kindergarten that this memory happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, you know, clearing out the space, like sometimes some heavy shit's going to come through
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have to deal with those things, but it was monumental to be able to have that come up, have that experience come through in my mind, and be able to take my current self back and to sit with that little tiny girl and hold her and let her know, like, it's okay now, you're safe, and this is never going to happen to you again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was powerful. Like that was the moment when I started really like reclaiming who I am. as an individual and saying, yeah, no, I'm not going to keep doing these behaviors because that doesn't align with who I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's huge, like to be able to take that little girl in your arms, or, little boy if you're male, or, whatever your scenario is, to be able to take that small child in your arms and love them in that moment, even, when that moment was terrifying.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful part about this, the concept of past, present, and future self. And when you step back and look at time as a construct, right? Like it's kind of man-made, and
Mhm.
we really are, we kind of are our past, present, and future versions all at the same time, all the time. So not only is it beautiful and I think necessary to go back to those times, when we're younger, and to give our past selves the love and the grace and the comfort that we deserved in that moment. But what's beautiful about it is once you start doing that, you're creating this really beautiful bond with your future and present self. And I just recently was re-triggered by an interaction with my ex. I
Mm.
messaged him. He came back unnecessarily harsh and verbally like attacking in text.
Mhm.
And I completely just got in my trigger space where I was placed right back into that abusive relationship, right back into a night, full of toxic anger and screaming and yelling and abuse and violence. And I could just feel my body, just like totally, like
Mhm.
alarm bells going off. But in that moment, I was able to separate it. And I just kept telling my present self, it's like my future self also was like in this moment with me in my
Mhm.
present, and just being like, you're safe. You left this relationship. This is why you left this relationship, right? Like all of this is a projection of his own insecurities and his own basically personal hell that he's refusing to step out of. And then in that moment, this was something recently that I'm super proud of. I was like, I can either sit at home and possibly just like go into a dark vortex of self-deprecating thoughts and remembering like all this terrible shit that happened just a couple of years
Mhm.
ago, right? Or I can utilize my tool set. And the thing I chose to do was to go be with people. I just knew I needed to get out of the house. Like I just left and found friends invited me to go do something. In that moment was just like, I'm feeling triggered and my emotions are kind of wild, but A, I'm going to go hang out with people that understand me and I can be safe
Mhm.
with. B, I know this isn't real. Like it is real, but it's not, right? Like my trigger
Right.
space is, I can honor that I'm being triggered, but I can also, now I can step in and be like, girl, we don't need to be triggered though. Like you don't need to
Mhm.
be afraid because you're safe, right? You literally are safe in this moment. So what you're feeling is something that happened, and it's valid that you're feeling this thing, but like now let's just do something with it. And what I chose to do was like one of my coping mechanisms and skills, and then like I'm fine so quickly in one night, like went from this highly triggered space to back to my ground, back to my peace,
Yeah.
back to that thing. And it's because I've been working on this. And I'm huge on future, like goddess, god, future highest self talk,
Mhm.
where like I visualize my best self and how she walks about her day and how she speaks to herself and other people and what types of things she does. And like her and I have a dope relationship. A lot of times she shows up to be like, all right, girl, we done being sad and wallowing. Like that was enough. Like you've given yourself that space. Like if we're gonna do the shit you say you're gonna do in this life, now it's time to get back to it.
Mm.
Like great way to honor it. But I'm here to remind you that we got some shit to do. And like she's fierce. My goddess. So
Mhm.
she
Oh, I don't imagine she would be anything else.
right. And again, and I am her, she is me. Like
Mhm.
we're all these versions of ourselves, and we can arrive. And when we work on the past, I think regression stuff, we really start to integrate and see how we can show up for ourselves moment to moment basis. Even if
Mm.
your past self was just 2 weeks ago in something that was really traumatic, how is your now self showing up, all those things. So
Yeah, yeah, like fully integrated.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for talking to me today and taking time. I know that you're so busy with everything. So I'll put links to your website. I'll put links to Drip. If you guys want to check any of that out, Jen's great to, respond if you have questions. I don't know if you want to tease your event this summer and fall.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, so I mean the one thing I should probably like describe even more about Drip is it's the movement side of it is very sexy. So it's definitely a female like feminine energy embodiment type of practice where it's yoga meets like burlesque and sensual floor work. So activate and accept your sensual and sexual power and gifts. But in October I'm hosting, if you're local or not, I'm hosting a retreat 45 minutes outside of Salt Lake, tucked up in the mountains, in one of my most favorite places. And it'll be a goddess retreat weekend where I'm utilizing the format of my drip teacher training to create a structure of the weekend, but essentially we'll be deep diving, meeting like-minded sisters, doing lots of movement and practice work. We'll be talking about creating safe space and how do we start to navigate our own trauma responses. Because I know, Sheena, as you are diving into Body Keeps the Score, a lot of times trauma sneaks up on us when we actually start moving our bodies, because there's hidden trauma that lives in our bodies. And when we choose to start opening our bodies up and moving, sometimes we get kind of smacked in the face with unexpected things. So we'll talk about trauma. We're gonna dance. We're gonna be sexy. I have special guests coming up to teach burlesque and some other floor work type of stuff. It's gonna be just such a beautiful weekend of healing and connection, and kind of it loops back to what I was talking about sacred sisterhood, creating this space where we can experiment with what it means to actually show up as healed, conscious human beings and actually hold one another and see one another and allow one another to express with like no judgment and not even a retort, not even just like, you're going to be okay. Just like literal, just energetic holding of people through this beautiful format of what I've created, the practice that I've created, and also just creating a container for women to be their own medicine and to be, to be our own powerful healers. So yeah, three nights, 4 days. All the details are also on my website, so you can post about that. And you can also feel free to post my email for anyone else listening that's wants to reach out to me. I also have a free just connection call that you can schedule on my website if you just want to pick my brain or need a safe space to talk to somebody. I offer one free call to everybody for 20 minutes. So feel free to reach out.
Well, and I think for anybody who is doing archetype work, I think that this retreat is so critical for someone like myself who is in a position where, like for me, a lot of the trauma and things that I went through, I have a very hard time living in that lover archetype space. And Jen just embodies that so well. So if you're working on that, that's drip is a good place to start, because it will teach you some of the foundation of opening up, and reconnecting to that version of yourself to be able to reactivate that in your life and then be more whole in the moment and find those connections with other people, right?
You just stated all that beautifully, love.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It was so good to talk to you and so much fun always.
Oh, yes. I mean, bring me on again. I love this. This was so nourishing. I love you so much. And yeah, just thank you.